Welcome students to the next lecture of public finance. We have covered a major milestone while coming over here, while getting over here. We have very recently closed the topic of government expenditure, and we have opened up a new arena for us, which is government finance. And government finance is basically related to the sources of revenue for the government, because for those sources of revenues, government need to tax the individuals, and those tax have their own effects. So it is very important to study this area also in greater detail. We were discussing the government expenditure in great detail in previous lectures, because government expenditure has a major effect on the economy, because how government spends its money is very important, but then also how governments acquires those funds to spend on those resources, again very important. So we came up to the topic of taxes. We discussed various sources that government might have, and one of the major sources is taxes. There are different types of taxes, and taxes are basically compulsory payments that are that individuals or citizens are bound to pay, or economic agents are bound to pay, because corporates are also entitled to pay or required to pay a certain amount of tax. So taxes basically how they affect the economy. They affect basically in many ways, but the three major areas in which there is effect of taxes, that is they affect the political equilibrium in a sense that we discussed that in a greater detail in terms of when we were discussing the political process. Now, during a political process, an individual considers his marginal benefit and marginal cost while considering a vote. So, since that marginal cost is the tax share or the tax price, which we used to say, so this tax, the amount of tax actually affects the voting outcome directly. So, there is a close relationship among them, and that is how the amount of taxation, how much we are taxed, actually affects the political equilibrium. Then it affects the market equilibrium also. Market equilibrium in a sense that the amount of tax placed on a certain good, the selling price of certain good or a service, actually decides how much quantity that is to be bought, because once the price goes up, because I have to pay a tax along with the use of that product, so now I buy less of the quantity, because that is a simple supply and demand relationship. At lower prices people purchase more, and at higher prices people purchase less. This is the law of demand. So because of the government tax, the prices increase. Now I not only have to pay the supplier, but I also have to pay the government. So for me, the price that I face is more than the price that it was before. So that would automatically mean that now I would choose lesser quantity. But the supplier who was willing to supply that equilibrium quantity at that specific equilibrium price, now not only has to face the lesser revenue, because now I am going to purchase less of the product, but also he has to pay the part of that price which was actually not going out of his pocket, it is coming out of my pocket, but he has to pay it to the government. So actually it disturbs the market equilibrium also. Then it also affects the distribution of income. Distribution of income in a sense that taxes are basically constraint on my command over the resources that I have, because some of my resources are taken away from me, and that is the tax actually. So that is one of the way it affects the distribution of resources. Then on the second thing, that since it disturbs the market equilibrium, there are taxes on goods and services. Through that it again affects the revenue of the supplier or producers of goods and services. So that again affects the market from the other angle. Then there is basically tax is basically some constraint on constraint on the demand of my command over the resources. So what are the resources that I have command on? So that related to our discussion on the the basics of tax. Tax is basically there is one concept is tax base. Tax base is actually which activity or which resource is being taxed. There are broadly three basic tax bases: income and consumption and wealth. And the most important thing is that all of them are closely related to each other. Why? Because the income I earn, out of that I consume, and then that consumption and income are taxed, and then what I do not consume is what I save, and what I save is what I invest, and that is my total wealth that I accumulate. So either I have property, or I have for example either I have property or I have stocks, or all those accumulate into my wealth. So either my wealth is taxed, or my consumption is taxed, or my income is taxed, and all of them are very closely related to each other. They affect each other very directly, in fact. Now then there are, for example, general taxes. General taxes are those taxes which are on the complete base, and then there are selective taxes which only tax a portion of the whole base. For example, general sales tax would be a tax on sale of all the goods and services. In other words, it would be a consumption tax. So it would be on consumption of all goods, it would be general. But there would be, that's why it is named general sales tax. Then there are selective taxes. For example, a property tax is a selective tax. Like, property is part of the total wealth that I have, but only the property part of my wealth is being taxed, so it is a selective tax. Then we discussed the tax rate structure actually. In this we had tax rate is basically the amount paid considering the whole value of the base, how much of the whole value of the base I pay as a tax. So there is an average tax rate, which is the amount of the tax paid divided by the total value of the base. And then there is marginal tax rate. Marginal, again, in the same sense as marginal is always used, with increase in the quantity, or will increase the value of the tax base, how much the tax rate is increased. So it is basically the change in the tax rate divided by the change in the tax, the increase in the tax base actually. So that is the marginal tax rate. Then we discussed like tax brackets. Tax brackets are created in terms of, for example, in terms of income, it can be a tax bracket of 10,000 to 25,000, then from 26,000 to maybe 40,000. So these would be tax brackets, and within a tax bracket is defined in a sense that the marginal tax rate within a tax bracket is constant. It does not change. It only changes across the tax brackets. Then we discussed various methodologies of taxing, and those would be like progressive taxes, regressive taxes, and proportional taxes. The first one is proportional tax. Basically, proportional tax is a specific rate of tax that is applied across the board on various levels of the base. If the base increases, the tax rate on them does not increase. So actually, along a proportional tax, we saw a graph in which the marginal tax rate and average tax rate are a constant line, straight line parallel to x-axis. Then what is progressive tax? Progressive tax is when increase in the base, the tax rate actually increases. So in this case, the marginal tax rate is above the average tax rate, and we saw that in a graph. But within a tax bracket, the marginal tax remains constant, but as soon as you change the bracket, the marginal tax rate increases, and the average tax rate along the bracket is increasing, but marginal tax rate is above that average tax rate. Then there is for example, regressive taxation. In terms of regressive taxation, the tax rate decreases with increase in income. That is, for example, in that case, marginal tax rate is below the average tax rate. Then in the next in the last lecture, we also discussed that on what principles the methods of taxation should be based. Should it be based on the benefit principle, or should it be based on ability to pay principle? Benefit principle states that the amount of of tax should be defined by the benefit an individual derives from the use of a government service or a product. And ability to pay taxation principle says that all individuals should pay tax based on the ability that they have. So then in benefit principle we discussed, we as an example, that each individual using a road is actually using a government service, a government product actually. So if I'm using a government product, that would mean that if I'm using it more, I should be taxed more. So what would be the method of doing that? So we discussed a fuel example, that if fuel is taxed and that amount of tax is used for the maintenance and construction of road, that would automatically be proxying my use of that road. Then we were discussing the ability to pay principle, in which there is each individual should be paying the amount of tax based on his ability, his economic ability. Based on this, we discussed two concepts, which were horizontal equity and vertical equity. Horizontal equity is when individual of same economic level, economic ability, paying the same amount of tax, and we debated that also. There was a debate over here, but no one was arguing against me, so I was the only one giving the arguments, and that was very interesting part of the debate. That was the part I liked actually, where I wanted to say what I said and nobody could argue against me. But that would have been more fruitful if there were other views also. It usually is, because academic views may differ for across each individuals. All I express over here are my views made up from the various literature that I've gone through during my course of studies, and you are entitled to have your own views, and but that actually is of course up to each and every individual how they acquire their own views. So horizontal equity was debated on the grounds that how would you define the ability to pay of an individual, because the only proxy for ability to pay is the income that he's earning. So what if some individual has more responsibilities, then an ability to pay would be less, but income measure would only be treating them as being able at the same level. Then in terms of vertical equity, we also debated that what would be the norm of fairness, that if marginal benefit of each dollar earned declines, is a downward sloping, then what would be the norm of fairness for taxing the individual who is earning more income? And that norm of fairness would be very difficult to evaluate, because that norm of fairness would define what would be the tax rate on people earning higher levels of income, and that might create a level of unfairness. And if an individual is earning more income, then he might be earning his extra income to maybe to finance certain activity that is not required by the individual of lower income level. So then in that case, considering maybe he's trying to finance his treatment of certain disease or certain medical treatment, so and maybe he would be disabled to work later on in his life, God forbids. So in that case he would be saving more, but if his income is taxed, his ability to save, his command over his resources would be reduced. So that was the whole debate around vertical and horizontal equity and the concept of ability to pay, because that is again very questionable in my view. So but then the government has to standardize, because everybody's views cannot be taken and political outcomes are not possible if everybody has get the ability to express their views, and there are debates and not everybody can be made happy out of political equilibriums. Now we also discussed that this ability to pay is very complex concept to evaluate the methods of taxation or methods of government finance, and provided again with another complication which arises out of government taxation of goods and services, and prices and quantities of inputs and outputs being sold in the market are affected by government taxation. So there is a double-edged effect on the equity aspect. So what would be the criteria? As I said in the last lecture, that in the coming lecture I would be trying to define a criteria based on which the government finance can be evaluated. There are broadly the the criteria can be you can say divided into these three broad headings. One is equity, the other one is efficiency, and the third one is administrative ease. What would be equity? The equity distribution of burden of government finance should coincide with commonly held notion of fairness and the ability to pay. Now that is one of, because if we accept the concept of ability to pay, but since ability to pay was a very complicated scenario to discuss, to evaluate, to pinpoint to a certain level of fairness, so that cannot be the only criteria. So we also needed some other additions to our whole box of criteria, or toolbox, to evaluate the various methods of government finance. So over here we choose efficiency and administrative ease along with the equity aspect of evaluation. So equity is basically it is evaluating the government finance method based on commonly held norms of fairness, that what would be the fair level of taxation and what would be the fair level of fees and licenses, and are they based on the ability to pay principle of taxation. Then there is the efficiency principle. The system of government finance should raise revenues with only a minimal loss in the efficiency in the private sector. Now, since we discussed many number of times that every action by the government, either those are subsidies or those are taxes, they might distort the market equilibrium. I specifically gave you an example of in the last lecture in terms of, for example, fountain pens being sold by a firm for 30 rupees. And if that sale of those pens are taxed for government finance, and it raises this price to 35, then I as a user of that pen would be looking at 35 and I would be demanding less. So that would automatically create an inefficiency, because the seller won't be getting the 35 amount, he would be getting the original equilibrium amount, which is 30, but the demand would be low, so the revenue would be reduced for him, and it would create an inefficiency in the market just by doing that. So there are other aspects of inefficiencies that we also discussed, but this was the one of them. So the ideal level of government finance would be that they are creating minimum distortions in the private sector while they are doing efforts to raise revenue. So minimum loss of efficiency would be most optimal criteria for the government finance. Then there is administrative ease. A government finance system should be relatively easy to administer in a consistent manner without excessive cost to collect, enforcement, and comply with tax and taxation laws. Now, the system should be simple. In other words, the system should be consistent. It should be very easy to understand and very easy to implement, number one. And taxation should not be so complicated that even to collect the tax, the government might incur a huge amount of revenue while collecting that tax and implementing the tax laws. So it should be so simple that it can be easily implemented in terms of administrative aspect of collection of taxes. And because every time there is a collection of tax, there is a cost to collect those tax, and whenever there are collection of taxes, there are that is like implementing a law also. So you need to ensure that the taxation system is so simple that and so you can say consistent, that it would reduce the cost of whole process of taxation, the administrative cost of it, and it would be easy to enforce and make other individuals comply with the taxes and the tax laws. Because if the taxation system is complicated, individuals tend to avoid that, might tend to avoid that, and to enforce that law there would be additional costs. So there would be the administrative cost of taxation would be high. So while evaluating a government finance, it is necessary to consider these three parameters in your mind, that how does it affect the equity in terms of distribution of income, how does it affect distribution of income or equity in the sense of ability to pay, and then how does it affect the efficiency of the market mechanism, the market forces, does it create inefficiency to a greater extent or not, and then what would be the administrative ease of the procedures that have been devised by the government to generate revenue. Now these would be the basic criteria Now, first, as I discussed earlier, then we have been discussing in terms of subsidies also. We have been discussing many times that there is always a trade-off between equity and efficiency, because if you ensure more equity, there is a possibility that you would lose on efficiency. But if you ensure efficiency, then it is highly possible that efficient taxes would might be deemed inequitable by many citizens, but then equitable taxes might cause losses in efficiencies. So government, this while evaluating the government's outcome, we must consider that government has a choice to choose between equity and efficiency, and they have a trade-off, and they know it very well while applying various sort of taxes. Now, one of the very interesting topics that I have always felt very inclined towards, that is the concept of tax evasion. Tax evasion is the term of which says that there are illegal ways of avoiding paying taxes. It is typically the result of not declaring your income or overstating otherwise your legal deductions. So in that sense, tax evasion is basically a burden on the society. Why tax evasion is a burden to the society? Because the tax evaders are those individuals who are also utilizing government goods and government supplied goods and services, and if they are utilizing the government supplied goods and services, then they need to pay for those services. But while evading tax, they actually, by hiding their income, and there are so many types of tax evasion. It can be from, for example, sales tax skimming, or it can be not declaring your income, or it can be, for example, declaring your deductibles to be too high than they actually are. So because the tax administration is a big setup and people often find opportunities to cheat the tax administration, so that would be tax evasion, and actually it is an illegal activity. So it is studied under the shadow economy part of it is part of the shadow economy. Because why shadow economy? Because shadow, though that income is not documented anymore, since it is hidden from the tax authorities. Once it is hidden because of the reason that it is in order to pay lesser amount of taxes. Then there is tax avoidance. It is basically these are the legal ways of avoiding paying taxes, either delaying them or reducing the amount. Typically the result of avoiding activities that are tax, delaying the time in which taxes are owed, or taking an action designed to lower a tax burden. So it can be tax avoidance is basically avoiding the tax, and that is usually done through in search of loopholes in the system, and using various accounting, you can say, if there are malpractices, that would be tax evasion. But using various accounting methods, individuals might avoid or delay certain amount of tax payment for a certain year or a certain time period, or they might even take certain actions which would lower the tax burden. So tax avoidance is not as such illegal in a sense, but on moral grounds that is totally a different debate. So tax compliance and tax evasion basically are very you can say are very in certain cases are a major part of the government revenue that is not given to the government. While we consider tax avoidance, we also consider the scenario that what if most of the population does not pay taxes, and let's say 50% or 40% of the population does not pay tax on the income that is supposed to be taxed. We are not saying on for those individuals who are not eligible to pay tax, who do not have enough taxable income, but if tax evasion is done by those individuals who have to pay taxes, then in that case consider that government goes into a deficit. So if the government goes into deficit the next time for production of public goods and services, and if the costs of those goods and services is not met by the existing taxes, what would happen? The very common sense answer would be that government would need to increase the taxes to keep its machinery running, and then again who would bear the burden of that taxes? the burden of those taxes would fall again upon the taxpayers who were already paying the taxes. So the tax evaders not only are free riders who are using public goods and services free of cost, but they are also those individuals due to which the burden on taxpayers is increased. So in other words, the taxpayers are actually financing not only their own burden on goods and services, on government goods and services, but they are also lifting the burden of all the tax evaders. So anybody evading tax is not a burden, is not just enjoying himself, but he is on a burden to some taxpayers or one taxpayer. So any individual who does not pay tax is a burden on another individual who pays tax. So this tax evasion is a bigger issue for the governments in terms of revenue generation, because their sources of revenues are going through a bottleneck, and they are crushed, and they need that revenue to provide more services. So tax evaders basically are a burden on the government and on the taxpayers and on themselves if they consider it, because over the longer term, if government's revenue is not fulfilled, the tax burden or government going into deficits or government borrowing from external sources would be a burden on them in terms of inefficiency in the markets, in terms of increased prices on goods and services. So they do not consider it, but the burden also falls upon them over some period of time. So discussing tax compliance and tax evasion, marginal benefits and marginal costs are associated with tax evasion. Benefits in terms of having to pay no tax at all or very less tax, and that is a benefit. For example, if I am considering that I am going to evade tax this year, then in that case the marginal benefit would be having a higher level of income with me, because I would be paying a less amount of tax. Then there is a marginal cost to it also. Marginal cost would be the penalties and the fines and monetary penalty and fines, and then non-monetary action, legal action against me if I am caught. So marginal, if there are various theoretical foundations and various theoretical discussions about tax evasion, why would people avoid paying tax, and if they consider that probability of being caught is very high, and if being caught, then there is probability of escaping the government legal action is very strict, and there are no chances of avoiding that, then they would not evade tax. But if they consider that the probability of avoiding probability of being caught is low and the benefit they are acquiring is much higher, then in that sense they would be evading taxes. And plus, if specifically if they consider that if being caught, they can using some you can say unethical ways, they can get out of that whole scenario, then that would be again an incentive to evade tax. In presence of progressive taxation, marginal benefit and marginal you can say marginal tax rate declines as more income goes unreported. So marginal cost rises because probability of being audited increases with more income being unreported. The whole context of progressive taxation, the advantage of progressive taxation is that since marginal tax rate declines with more income as more income goes unreported, and marginal benefit declines with that. On the other hand, as more and more income goes unreported, the probability of being caught increases. So marginal cost is going up, but marginal benefit is declining. So individual would automatically find a point of equilibrium where he would prefer to pay taxes rather than evade taxes. So now discussing that, moving on with it. Now, in order to reduce tax evasion, the steps, what can the government do to reduce tax? First would be any individual who is considering evading tax, he would be considering the marginal private benefit that he has from he derives from that you can say tax evasion, and he would also consider the cost of it, that if I get caught, what would be the punishment, how much fine do I have to pay, how much legal action or imprisonment would be there for me, and would I be monitored, and all those scenarios would be termed as marginal cost. So at a given amount of marginal benefit, which is a downward sloping curve, and marginal cost, which is an upward sloping curve, there would be a specific amount of equilibrium level of tax evasion or equilibrium level of unreported income that I would keep. So this graph, a set of graphs in 3 panels, A, B and C, shows what methods can be used by the government to discourage tax evasion. Now in the first half, let us first consider the axis. On the x-axis there is unreported income per year in terms of dollars, and on y-axis there is cost and benefit. Cost again in a sense that what would be the prosecution cost, or for example what would be the fines and penalties and legal action against me. Those would be the cost of keeping a level of unreported income, and there would be benefit of course for having an unreported income, because now I have to pay, I have more command over my resources and I have to pay less amount of taxes to the government. So the first panel represents the equilibrium of marginal benefit and marginal cost, marginal private benefit and marginal cost of tax evasion. So if marginal benefit is declining, every more units of income I keep as unreported, my benefit from that income declines, and marginal cost is an increasing cost because more income I keep unreported. There is a risk of being caught, the risk of being caught increases, and the level of penalty that would be applied on me and the level of prosecution or level of legal action against me would also be greater. It would be correlated with the level of unreported income that I have. So there would be an equilibrium point which is shown in panel A or graph A in the slide, which is represented by point E, and it represents that an individual would keep a D star amount of unreported income, considering the given scenario of marginal benefits of keeping an income unreported and marginal cost of keeping an income unreported. So point E would be the point of equilibrium, and now let us see what methods can be used to avoid this scenario, to reduce the tax evasion. The first option that we have is in the sense of which is shown in panel B. So what we can do is we can either increase the marginal cost of tax evasion, or we can reduce the marginal benefit of tax evasion. So both of these would result into reduction in tax evasion. In part B, in panel B, we are looking at a scenario in which the marginal benefit has been reduced for keeping a given level of unreported income, and that marginal benefit reduction represents a new point of equilibrium, which is E2. Previously in that graph, D1 star was the point of equilibrium where a certain level of unreported income was kept by the individual, but with a decrease in marginal benefit, the marginal benefit curves shift leftwards towards the origin, and that the new point of equilibrium is represented by E2, and that is D2 star for example is the new point of equilibrium, which is the less amount of reported income that an individual keeps with him. One way to shift the marginal benefit towards the origin, to shift the marginal benefit curve or to reduce the marginal benefit, would be to reduce the marginal tax rate, because as we discussed that with progressive taxation, marginal tax rate and marginal benefit, both of them decline with increase in unreported income. So one of the ways would be to restructure tax brackets and restructure taxation in such a way, not tax bracket but the tax structure in such a way that marginal tax rate declines, and if the marginal tax rate declines, then the marginal benefit of keeping an unreported income also declines. That would shift the marginal benefit curve leftwards, and that would reduce the level of unreported income per year by a certain individual. And in the third case, where the graph is the C panel, it represents that the same result can be achieved by increase in marginal cost of tax evasion. Marginal cost is basically what the cost of tax evasion is actually the amount of, in terms of the fees and penalties that an individual has to pay if he is caught, or also for example, it would also be the legal penalties or the legal action taken by the government. So increasing marginal cost would be, for example, marginal cost can be increased by increase in the penalties that are placed on individuals if they are caught, like that would be that can be in terms of legal action also, that strict legal action may be taken against those individuals who are caught. Now this all revolves around, on one end, on the credibility, because if a government's threat is credible in one sense, then next time everybody would be very careful. So if that threat is credible, and if government can actually increase the marginal cost of tax evasion, then automatically the marginal cost curve will shift leftwards and upwards, and that would result into a new equilibrium point. Previously the individual was at E1, and that represented E1 star of unreported income, but with increase in the marginal cost and the probability of being caught, if the government is conducting massive audits and tax audits, and they are strict on those individuals who are caught, for example, because of tax evasion, then that would increase the marginal cost of rest of the individuals, and people would be careful while avoiding taxes. You can say tax evasion, not avoiding taxes. Tax avoidance is totally a different aspect. Now, what would be the other alternatives of for the government for the government finance, other than the taxation? Because we have discussed taxation in a greater detail over here. We would be looking at various aspects again later on, but the effects of taxation, income taxes, property taxes, and we would be discussing those in the later lectures. But after covering the basics of taxation and taxes, now let us consider the other sources of government finance. One is, for example, debt finance, and the other one is inflationary finance. Debt finance is the means of financing expenditure through issuing of bonds, and people willingly buy bonds. Whenever the government issues bond, that is a means of debt finance. Now do not confuse deficit finance with debt finance over here. We will come to that. Debt finance is the means of financing expenditure through the issuing of bonds. Now people willingly buy bonds because the interest payment is sufficient to offset the requirement of current consumption, and taxes are used to pay off debt. Now what is debt finance? Is basically the means of financing expenditures by the government when they issue bonds in the market. And why would certain individual would go and buy those bonds? Because their current level of income, if they have a certain level of income, and they would consider that, okay, this much I can save and this much I can consume, and those savings would be translated into those government bonds, because then those bonds pay interest to those individuals, and they are specifically very, you can say, risk-free bonds. Actually, there is no default risk out of them, because the government owns the backing, so there is no default risk. So the result is that people would buy those bonds, and there would be certain interest payments on them, and the individuals who buy those bonds do not have any consumption requirements. And then later on, when those bonds are required to be paid, government can either increase taxes to pay off the debt, or they can also issue more bonds to pay out the old ones, or they can also use inflationary finance, but that debate would come later on. Inflationary finance is means of financing expenditures through printing of more money, because whenever the printing of more money takes place, there is more inflation in the economy, and that's why this printing of money is termed as inflationary finance. Printing of money and increase in the levels of inflation revolves around the school of monetary economics, actually. And if the central bank is very obediently obeys the government and prints more money and circulates in the economy, then it would be a scenario of too much money chasing too few goods, because the number of goods being produced is the same, but the number of money circulating in the economy is more. That would mean that people would automatically bid up the prices. Now it is basically debated in the classical and new classical and for example Keynesian school of thought, that what type of mode of finance is, what type of how inflation goes up, whether it is long term or short term, and what is the effect of increasing money supply in the economy. But that is not like our discussion over here right now. So inflationary finance is the means of financing the government expenditure either through printing the money or increasing the monetary base. Then there is because of reduction in the value of goods due to the inflationary tax, so reduces command over resources in the private sector and money accumulates towards the government. That is how inflationary finance is used. When they print more money, they circulate in the economy, there is reduction in the real value of money, and in other words there is inflationary tax on the prices of the goods, which we will discuss later on. When it reduces the command over resources, because now I am in any type of tax, even inflationary tax would result into lesser command of over the resources, and that would automatically translate into more resources for the public sector or the government. Now inflationary finance is being explained over here through the graph. For example, I hope you have heard about production possibility frontier. I guess we discussed a similar, we discussed the production possibility frontiers in our first lectures. Production possibility frontier is this curve. For example, there is this is a most common example used in economics, the production of guns per year or butter per year. Butter representing the consumption goods and guns representing for the defense. So any country can choose any combination of guns and butter they can produce. So for example, there is on x-axis there are a number of guns, a number of butter being quantity of butter being produced, and on y-axis there are number of guns being produced per year. Now this curve from T to T slash, this concave curve is representing various combinations of butter and good that a country can produce while it is using its resources at its maximum. So points below this curve are also attainable, but they would be inefficient point, because that would mean resources are going to waste, and point outside this curve would be unattainable because there are not enough resources to reach that point. For example, normally the point I would be unattainable point. Now let us assume that currently the government is the economic system is producing at the point A. That point A would mean that they are producing B1 amount of butter and G1 number of guns in the economy. Now let us assume that there is a war or any other reason due to which the government needs more guns. So in order to finance those guns at the current amount of butter that they are being producing, they would use inflationary finance. They would just simply print more money and they would pay it to produce more guns. So they would reach point I temporarily. So when they reach point I, they would be producing the same amount of butter because on this production possibility frontier, if you need to increase quantity of one good, you need to reduce the quantity of other good. So in terms of inflationary finance, when you need to increase the quantity of guns, you might use inflationary finance and you might print more money and hire more resources, more inputs, and then you can produce more output. So at the same level of butter, without acquiring resources from the butter side, that side of production, you jump to point I where you produce more guns, and from there later on you would move on to point C. When the effects of inflation are realized by the economic agents, they would purchase less of all the goods, and that would result into reduced demand of butter also, because its price would be inflated also, and then the economy would move on to point C. But just for a temporary phase, the inflationary finance helped the economy jump to point I. So this is another mode of government finance that is used other than taxation. We discuss inflationary finance finance. We also discussed debt finance. We didn't get any chance to debate or discuss debt finance in detail, which we would do later, but that is again, when governments get into debt, the burden of that, it is possible that the burden of that debt would be financed by excessive taxation on the next generation. So there is a whole debate, and we would discuss that when we consider the Pakistan's debts and deficit financing, because deficit financing leads into government going into a deficit, and in order to finance that deficit they need to issue bonds or acquire resources from for example through issuing internal debt or getting external debt, issuing external debt. So and those debts are required to be financed by a higher level of taxations later on. Just like in the case of Pakistan, we owe a lot of debt to for example World Bank and IMF, and in order to pay that debt there would be excessive taxation on the next generations, because the previous generations decided to spend more money than that they had. So there is a whole debate on that, because it is intergenerational transfer of burden. That is actually what that is. So there are various economists who would say that government budget should always be balanced, and there are economists who would say that deficit financing would be a very good idea, because if an economy goes into deficit just because of while making more schools and more hospitals, that would be useful later on, and because of more economic growth later on, it would be easier to pay the debts. But we'll get there when we get there. So more alternatives to taxation. For example, there are donations, money, but most usually time is voluntarily given to government. Military service or work in the Peace Corps, for example, can be considered as a donation when the compensation is less than the market value of the time that is given to that activity. Then there are user charges. Payment by users of the government services can be expected by the government. Examples include tuition fees paid to enter the government parks, and then there are government-owned golf courses, government-owned maybe for example motorways, or all those facilities. So there are user charges of those facilities. Whoever uses those facilities also pays for them. So that is another mode of government finance other than the taxation, because we have discussed taxation, we discussed for example debt finance, then we discussed inflationary finance, then we have donations, now we have user charges. And another example is earmark taxes. Taxes can be implemented to fund specific public goods. Examples include gasoline taxes and tolls designed to fund roads and bridge repair, for example. So these would be taxes that are for some specific activity already defined, so they can also be a source of revenue for the government. Now let us first discuss the user charges and what would be the effect on the efficiency of the good that is being subject to the user charge. Now price excludable goods generate external benefits. We have already discussed that. What are price excludable goods and what are the external benefits? I would like you to answer that. Okay, most of you are, I hope they are right. I cannot say they are right, but I hope they are right. Price excludable goods are those goods in which the price mechanism, you can exclude those individuals from using that good who do not pay for the good. For example, if I do not want to pay for the use of motorway, the toll guy won't raise the barrier and I cannot enter the motorway. So it is a price excludable good, because those people who are willing to pay for it can only use that good. And what would be the external benefits then? There are positive externalities of public goods also, because for example government vaccinations have externalities. We discussed that in detail. For example, if I get vaccinated, that would also maybe I get polio vaccine, and that would also be useful for you because now there is a less risk of being caught getting polio disease from me. So that would mean that there are external benefits from public goods. So in other words, we discussed that what is it is difficult to put a price tag on the external benefits, and the true price of the good, the true social benefit is the private benefit plus the external benefit of that good, and that is termed as marginal social benefit. So let us consider an example specifically, that a utility company, for example in our cases the cantonment boards, collect trash from the area, and there are minimal charges for that also. So there are two types of benefits. One type is to the marginal private benefit that I get, for example, of that trash being removed from the area, and then there is external benefits also in terms of the area beautification, and then it gives benefit to all the people who are either living in that area, or they move into that area, or they drive through that area. So there would be an external benefit in terms of beautification of that area, and no smell originating out of the garbage that is being collected. So there is a marginal social benefit would be equal to marginal private benefit plus the marginal external benefit. To ensure efficient quantity, price charged is when marginal social cost is equal to marginal private benefit, and additional amount is subsidized by the government. Now what would that do to the efficiency of the market? We have already discussed that subsidies by the government affects the market efficiency and market outcomes. Now in this case you cannot charge, for example, if I am getting a benefit out of certain government good, then there is also an external benefit, but why should I be the only one who should be paying for the external benefit? So what would the government charge then? Would it charge me equal to my marginal private benefit, or would it charge equal to the external benefit? So the optimal choice would be to charge me for the marginal private benefit that I derive from that public good, and the rest of the amount needs to be subsidized by the government because it is for everybody else, and I don't need to bear the expense of that. So this trash pickup example is a very good example of the same of this scenario that we are discussing, that how would certain user charge, minimal user charge, which is actually the cost of providing that activity, is equal to the marginal private benefit, and then ignoring all the marginal external benefit, then government has to subsidize that whole process, and including considering that the cost at which that service is being provided is just for my marginal benefit, and the total cost is much greater for providing that service specifically. So what would it do to the efficiency in the market? Now let us consider this graph. For example, if there is a given on the x-axis there is trash pickups per year or per month, and on the y-axis there is for example the charges that are being subject to those people who are using that facility of the government. There is an upward sloping marginal social cost curve which represents that the cost actually increases with the increase in the quantity being provided, and then there is marginal sloping marginal private benefit curve which is the lower curve, downward sloping. It represents that why it is downward sloping is because my marginal benefit derives with the increase in the quantity that I use. Now then actually what happens is the actual cost would be higher because there is marginal social benefit and marginal private benefit. So if we add marginal external benefit and marginal private benefit, so if we see that the total demand of that product would be the marginal social benefit, which would be marginal private benefit plus marginal external benefit, and the point of equilibrium would be Z star over here. Then that would be the total cost of that service or that good being provided by the government. But I would be willing to pay only at where my marginal private benefit curve is. So what happens is that actually the quantity being supplied is equivalent to Z star or Q star, but the price that is being charged to me on the is exactly on the my marginal benefit curve for that given quantity, and that represents the price C star. So this price C star represents that this is what I would be paying, because that is basically based on my marginal private benefit curve for that given quantity, and the rest of the amount, which is C plus C star plus C S star, which is at the point of equilibrium of Z star, is to be subsidized by the government, which is represented by S star over here. So in other words, the user charge has in a sense is being subsidized by the government, and I am paying a lower actually a price which is lower than the marginal social benefit, and the government has to subsidize rest of the amount, and the quantity is being produced where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost just because of the subsidy being provided by the government. So in a sense this user charge has created efficiency in the market system because it has actually incorporated the subsidy which is equal to the marginal external benefit in the marginal private benefit, and the result is that quantity is being provided and prices is being charged which where marginal private benefit, marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, which was our criteria for the efficiency all along our debate in the public finance. Now then that would mean can also create efficiency if benefits of the government goods are congestible. Now what are the congestible public goods? Congestible public goods would be those public goods like roads, for example, in which case when there is an additional user on that road, then the cost of using that road increases for all the users and the users before that. So that would mean that the service has congested and the costs are increasing. So can the user also create can the government user charge can also create an efficiency in terms of the congestible public goods? We saw that it creates an efficiency in terms of the public good which we discussed before, the collection of trash, for example, from an area or garbage from an area. It incorporated a subsidy equal to the marginal external benefit into the scenario, so that marginal social benefit was equal to marginal social cost, and it made the market efficient as such. So now there is, considering a scenario, what would happen to a congestible public service and how can it bring in efficiency. Now to do this, we consider example of a road which is a congestible public service, public product, a good. No price required if traffic is below the point of congestion. As long as the traffic is below the point of congestion, there is no extra charges required on that, but above that price may be charged equivalent to the point where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost. Now let's look at this scenario. Now there is for example consideration on the x-axis there are vehicles per mile per hour on the road, and there are user charges cents per mile which are being charged later on. Initially we consider that no charges are being charged by the government, user charges for that road, and then no marginal charges. So first consider the demand curve D1, and it is represents a marginal social benefit, and there are at that point where marginal social benefits hits the x-axis, and there is the point of equilibrium which is E1, and over there marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, and both of them are zero in fact, and there are 80 vehicles on the road. Now the equilibrium quantity would be 80 vehicles on the road. The point where the congestion would start would be 100 vehicles on the road, and that is represented by n star over here, and this n star specifically represents that after that the marginal social cost starts to rise. Before that marginal social cost for that was zero, but after this point since the public good is congestible, then marginal social cost would start to rise. So after the 100 vehicles, any more vehicles need to be allotted a user charge equivalent to the point where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost. So considering that there are 150 vehicles, for example, on the road, then what the government do, that is represented by the demand curve of D2, the marginal social benefit curve MSB2, and the new point of equilibrium is E2, and there are 150, for example, vehicles per mile and per hour. So that is creating congestion on the road, and that is why we said that after 100 the marginal social cost would rise. So what the government, how much charge should be allocated in order to ensure efficiency, that would be where this marginal, the new demand curve D2 or marginal social social benefit curve intersects the marginal social cost curve, and that would be the equilibrium point represented by E star, and that would be 120 vehicles. And how much charge should they allocate for that, and that is represented by 20 cents per mile over there, and that would be the charge of that service. And you see that it has reduced the number of vehicles from 150 per hour per mile to 120 per hour per mile, almost equivalent to the point where there are closer to the point of congestion, which is 100 vehicles, and there is a charge for that services. So all the individuals who are creating that congestion actually are paying for that congestion equivalent to the quantity where marginal social benefit is exactly equal to marginal social cost. Then we also need to discuss the government enterprise, because there are local utility services provided by the government also, and there are lotteries also through which government can also generate revenue, and that can be a source of government finance. For example, in case of WAPDA or railways or utilities would be specifically supply of water or supply of electricity or supply of gas, and those utilities can also generate revenue for the government. And in certain developed countries, these entities are very profitable organizations, profitable sources of revenue for the government also. Lotteries are mostly offered not specifically in Pakistan. I don't specifically remember any lottery offered by the government, but they are used as a source of finance, government finance by various governments. And it is another important debate that when providing local utilities or any service, how much amount should be, how much price should be, what would be the price tag on each unit, or what would be the prices for the supply of these goods and services. And that debate actually there, from traditional normative perspective, it is mentioned that they should charge the price where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, which we have discussed many times. But then there are other debates where what would be the total marginal social cost of providing that activity, or what would be the total marginal benefits, because there are external benefits and external costs also. So these are price excludable, but then there are external benefits and costs that are needed to be incorporated into that. I guess we should end this lecture over here. In the next coming lecture, we would be discussing the taxation and various effects of taxation on the efficiency as well. We would be how we compare what are the price distorting tax, and how would we compare the price distorting tax with other types of, for example, a lump sum tax, and we would make lump sum tax as a criteria. Before I leave, I guess, or we say call it a day, we should look at these slides once again. We started with defining a criteria for evaluating various alternative methods of government finance. One was equity. Equity was the distribution burden, that according to some perceived norms of fairness, whether every individual is being taxed based on ability to pay. And then there was efficiency, that the government should choose the methods of finance only in specifically where it is causing the least which is actually losses of causing least losses of efficiency in the market. And then there are administrative cost, administrative ease, specifically saying that the taxation principles, methods and laws of the government should be simplified in a sense that their implementation should be less costly than making it more costly. So any government finance method would be which is equitable and efficient and administratively easy would be basically evaluated as a good criteria, evaluated as on the good terms. So then there is always a debate over equity and efficiency trade-off. We have discussions on these grounds many times, and equitable taxes might cause losses in efficiency, but then efficient taxes might also be inequitable by many citizens. Then we discussed a grave matter of tax compliance and tax evasion, and we discussed that tax evasion is like illegal ways of hiding your taxable income, and tax avoidance is trying to delay the payment of tax, or taking up activities which would lower your tax burden. Tax evasion is illegal, but tax avoidance is not. And tax avoidance is basically where marginal benefit of evading tax evasion is greater than the marginal cost. And marginal benefit is like your income, you pay less tax, and marginal cost is in terms of the penalties that you have to pay, or any legal action that will be taken against you if you are caught. We also discussed this in terms of how to reduce the tax evasion. The basic, most simplest argument represents that equilibrium quantity of unreported income would be where marginal social benefit intersects marginal social cost for tax evasion. But so what we can do is either we can decrease the marginal benefit from for tax evasion. We can we propose that it would be reducing the marginal tax rate, and that would shift the marginal benefit curve leftwards and reduce the amount of unreported income. On the other hand, we can also increase the marginal cost, and in that case we would be increasing the penalty if an individual is caught, or the level of the strictness of legal action would be more strict. So marginal cost would shift outwards and upwards, and leftwards and upwards, and that would result into increased marginal cost, and that would again result into lesser unreported income per year. Then we also discussed debt finance, which is basically means of financing expenditure through issuing bonds. Then there is inflationary finance, is the means of financing expenditure through the printing of money. We discuss inflationary finance can be used to go beyond the production possibility frontier, production possibility for some time frame. For example, we discussed that on the production possibility frontier, the country was at point A, where there is, for example, B1 units of butter and G1 units of guns. While using inflationary finance, printing more money, they temporarily provide resources for more production, and that would the country would jump to point I, which was normally an unattainable point. But later on in the next period or period after that, when the prices rise up, and then the country would move back to point C, which would be the same level of guns but lesser level of butter being produced. That is one of the ways of using inflationary finance. Then there are donations and user charges and earmark taxes. We specifically were discussing the user charges. We considered an example of a trash pickup truck, and we discussed that government can create an efficiency by user charges. For example, the point of equilibrium was Z star, but that point was where marginal benefit was equal to marginal cost. But then at that point, marginal private benefit was lower than that, so the government would need to subsidize that much amount represented by S star, and the end result would be that there would be efficiency at the equilibrium output would be at Z star, which is marginal social benefit, the marginal social cost. If in the absence of that subsidy, the point would be lower than that, that would be even less than Q star, where marginal private benefit is equal to marginal social cost. Then we discussed that there are congestible public services, and how user charges can result into bringing in efficiency into congestible public services. We consider that the road, for example, is a congestible public good, and with more number of individuals using that, creates congestion and increases the social cost of using that road for all the individuals. And that point is represented by N star over here, that after N star, like after 100 vehicles, there would be more number of congestions, and cost of using that facility would increase. So previously the equilibrium point was E1, but if there is congestion, there are 150 vehicles, then at that point, at point E2, where marginal social cost is very high, the government need to put a user charge based on the demand curve, where marginal social benefit is equal to marginal social cost, represented by E star, and represented by, and where the number of vehicles would be 120, and the result would be decrease in the number of vehicles and getting more closer to the level where congestion would be close to zero. In the end, we discussed, I just mentioned local utilities and lotteries, which are another source of government enterprises, or another source of, for example, revenue for the government. Now, I guess we are out of time right now, so we need to finish this right here, and we would be discussing the effects of taxation and evaluating taxes later on in the next lecture. Hope to see you then. Allah Hafiz.